You are listening to episode number 55 of the Animals at Home podcast. Welcome to the show. My name is Dylan Perrin. Thank you very much for joining me. This is the podcast that inspires others to push the limits of their reptile husbandry by promoting the importance of high-level creative care individualized for each reptile. I hope you're having a great week so far. It's starting to seem like things are starting to open up with the whole coronavirus, COVID-19 issues. So hopefully your life is slowly starting to return back to normal. I know mine is, which is great. The weather is looking nice outside, so it's finally nice to get outside and get some vitamin D. I added a hibiscus plant to my day gecko enclosure, which I was super excited about. I shared a picture on my Instagram the other day. So the flowers are starting to bloom, which is really fun. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, I do post pictures periodically there. That is at Animals at Home CA. And if you are ever wanting to reach out to me to say hi or suggest a guest, you can contact me at hello@animalsathome.ca. That's .ca, not .com. Since the beginning of the lockdown, I've actually been able to post a podcast episode every single week, and I've had a lot of people reach out to me that are really appreciative of that. So thank you so much for listening. I do appreciate it. I will warn you, next week there may not be an episode. I'm not 100% sure. My week is a little bit hectic this week, and I have a few other projects that are on the go that I really want to release. I haven't really talked about them yet, and they're really exciting, and I cannot wait to share them with you guys. So I may spend some of my energy and time this week getting those together, but we'll see. I may have a chance to record an episode. You never know. But if there isn't one next week, don't worry, of course, there'll be one the week after. If you are interested in supporting the Animals at Home podcast, sharing it on social media is literally the best thing you can do. The more you can share it, the better. Again, we hit another download record last month. We're wrapping up right now. It is June 1st. As I'm recording this, the month of May was a download record. So again, thank you so much for supporting the show. And one last thing before we jump into the episode of the podcast, I want to thank CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. You can find links in the show notes as well as the YouTube description. They are affiliate links, so if you do purchase something, a small commission does come back to me at no extra cost to you. You know, something we've mentioned a few times on the show is how horrible so many of those reptile starter kits are. We've seen them all over the place. There's a big box retailers that have these, in air quotes, starter kits that often don't come with the appropriate equipment. And Custom Reptile Habitat solves that problem. They have really well done, thorough kits that are, bearded dragon kit, a leopard gecko kit, and a ball python kit that come with everything you need, including up until when they're an adult. So proper lighting, proper heating, proper substrate, the whole 9 yards. So if you are in the market for one of those animals, I would definitely go check them out. And that sort of leads us into our guest today, because my guest actually did a video on how bad reptile starter kits are. So if you want to check that out, I'll put that in the show notes. We don't talk about that in this episode, but today I am talking to Joseph Brabin. Joseph is the creator of the reptile channel JTB Reptiles. And in this episode of the podcast, of course, we cover heating and lighting. I think it's really important to continuously talk about that subject because every person I talk to has a slightly different take and a slightly different way they explain it. And I'm just hoping that as we talk about it, it becomes more digestible and understandable for everybody, because it is a complex topic, and I find when I talk to these really smart individuals like Joseph, it makes my understanding a lot more clear as well. We also talk about the brumation process he uses for his bearded dragon, corn snake, and leopard gecko. We talk about some of the inherent issues with those large pet tube channels and some of the advice that they give and whether it's good or not, or how do we weight the quality of their advice. Overall, this is a very fascinating conversation with Joseph, so I really hope you enjoy. I will talk to you after the episode. All right, well, Joseph, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Hello.
You are another one of those YouTube channels who is up to some really good things. You have some really good educational content on there, which is somewhat few and far between. And I've even had a few of my listeners reach out and ask me to make some videos on lighting or heating. And I always think well, Joseph's already done that, and you've done such a good job. And I want to get into that more. I think one of the main issues with YouTube is that it's hard to find the good educational material. Other things pop up first. So I think we'll have a good conversation about that as well. But tell me about where this came from. How was your childhood? Did you have animals always played a role in your life?
Well, actually getting into animals is something I've never particularly understood, because it really does sound cliche, and I'm sure other people have come on and said this to you before, but it's just been like an innate interest for as long as I can remember. I know my dad always tells a story of when I was dead young, before I could talk even, taking me to like a pet shop. And apparently, I don't remember this at all, I was too young, but apparently my reaction was like that I almost exploded with excitement. And some early memories as well is coming home from nursery school. and watching, I think was it Steve Irwin, Crocodile Hunter Diaries,
Yeah.
right from the very start, and they're like my earliest memories. And then there was the natural obsession with dinosaurs that every reptile keeper's had as a kid. That's never really gone away, but it's just started and never finished.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a common theme with many of us, is that we have no clue why, it just is.
Yeah, but I've asked myself many times why am I interested and why do I put so much time into it? But I'm never going to find out, I don't think. So I don't question it anymore.
Yeah, I always wonder if there was an experience as a young child that you might have had, or if it's a genetic thing. And that was something that I kind of spent some time thinking about as well. And I did wonder if maybe there is some sort of behavioral pattern that gets passed on from humans to humans. And because, of course, some humans in history, evolutionary history, must have been obsessed with animals as well. It's one of the reasons probably
Yeah,
animals became domesticated. People were working with animals. So who knows?
yeah, who knows? I mean, I honestly thought that the obsession with reptiles, I thought like, is there anybody else in the world that gets this? But you start meeting more people. And there was a book I read by Richard Kerridge a couple of months ago, and the way he described it was just perfectly how I think. So I don't know. I don't think we are aliens anymore.
No, no, that's definitely true. It was always like, even you go back 10 years ago or 5 years. No, yeah, 10 years ago, it was almost embarrassing to tell people that you kept reptiles, because they would kind of give you a bad reaction. But now it's a lot more common.
Yeah, it's much more mainstream.
So were reptiles always something that you were very interested in, or did you start with different animals and then evolve into reptiles?
Well, it's funny that because reptiles have always been the obsession. I've been fascinated with all animals, like I say, from a very young age. But reptiles are like the special obsession within the obsession, if you like. But when it comes to actually keeping animals, when I was younger, like 7, 8, 9, whatever, I wasn't allowed reptiles, and for good reason, really, because they're my bag, but not so much my family's. So to put the responsibility of an ant, like a reptile, a lizard, a snake on a child of that age wouldn't really be very responsible. So I ended up keeping fish for a long time before I ever started keeping reptiles, and I still keep fish now. Um,
Yeah, no, that's kind of where I started as well. Fish are a great place to start. And then I guess, were there other animals that eventually led you into reptiles?
Well, my first reptile was, I've got a list here when I got them. My first leopard gecko was April 2014. I'd spent a while thinking about getting like a reptile or an amphibian. And for a while I'd wanted like a Pac-Man frog, but then I eventually got a leopard gecko instead. And then it was sort of the end of that year, the end of 2014, I got my corn snake. Then it was 2 years again before I got my next one, which was my crested gecko. Then so that was 2014. Then my bearded dragon char was June 2018. Then after that, it sort of picked up momentum a little bit from there. And then it's currently at 11.
Yeah, so the classic expansion story. In terms of your
Yeah.
like in school or anything, did you ever want to pursue a career in animals, or have you done any education around animals?
Well, in my early years, there was a little pet shop, a little corner pet shop that's closed down now. Atlantis, it was called. They mainly had fish, budgies. They had leopard gecko or something. That's where I got my first one from. And when I was very little, I wanted to work there, work in the pet shop. And then as I got older, that idea faded because it dawned on me that if I worked in a pet shop, I would have to sell the animals, which I didn't like the idea of. And then I sort of thought, well, would I be a zookeeper? And that's what I thought for a long time. But as sort of as I've learned more and developed, I sort of don't really know particularly what I want to do. Apart from that, I want to do something involving genetics, reptiles, and taxonomy, because that's what floats my boat, these days. But in terms of education about it, beyond just maths, biology, chemistry, I've not done like an animal management course or anything like that.
Interesting. Yeah, very cool. So you started your YouTube channel's actually been around for a long time. When I was looking at
Yeah.
your channel like a few days ago, there's some pretty old videos. So I guess that probably
Oh
started as
yeah.
just a child, like you were just having fun on it.
Yeah, I think the channel got started when I was 9, which was March 2012,
And how old are you
and
right
then
now?
17.
17. Okay, so you've had it for a very long time.
Yeah, a very very long time. It was March 2012 was when I set it up, I think, and back then it was going to be, because I kept me fish back then, and that was all like the pets I had, so it was going to mainly be about fish. But then I also wanted to make Mario Kart videos, but thankfully that didn't happen.
That would have been an
Uh,
interesting combination: Mario Kart
yeah, it
videos
would
and
have been.
fish.
Well, I think there were actually a couple of highlights, but we won't talk about those.
so,
But
so yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say how it sort of started like that, and there was no real plan for it. It was just me, my hobby, what I did. And like I'd get 20 views, and 15 of them would be me checking the comments and likes. Uh, but I sort of always, there's a particular topic within fish keeping that I don't think people explain very well, but it is very, very important. And that's the idea of the nitrogen cycle. In my early days of making YouTube videos, even though they were mainly just fun and really, really bad, it was in the back of my mind that I wanted to explain the nitrogen cycle properly to people. I mean, I doubt that, being 9 years old, I'd probably have explained it wrong, but even from the start, there's sort of been a combination of a fun and educational aspect. And to this day, that's like developed more and more to where what I want the channel to be now is a base where people can learn things as well as just be entertained. Because I think generally people vastly underestimate the power that a video's got. People with loads of subscribers that get loads of views have an absolutely enormous impact on reptile keeping and keeping of other animals, far more impact than any scientific studies or books are ever going to have. So if you want to develop a YouTube channel and have it be worth something, then I feel that it is absolutely essential that you do check your information and don't just treat it like a business, because if you are successful, then the effect that can have on the lives of many reptiles across the world is enormous.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So even in those early days, you already kind of had that mindset. So can you explain what that fish, that Aquarius, was it? What do you call it?
Yeah,
Night?
sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nitrogen cycle.
Oh, nitrogen
Uh,
cycle. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I
yeah,
think most people will be familiar with that. I thought you said something like night vision or something. I was like, I've not
no,
heard of that.
no.
Yeah. So when you were young, because that is, I mean, if most people who, I shouldn't say most, but many people who have had reptiles have had fish as well, and many of us make
Yeah,
that first mistake too. Like I remember getting my first fish tank and going to Walmart, and they just gave me a whole bunch of fish, and like these fish would never have worked in the 10-gallon tank. They would have outgrown it. But I mean, the classic nitrogen cycle catastrophe happened where the fish were
yeah,
dead in 2 weeks. So when you were young, you actually already pointed that out and realizing that information wasn't out there enough.
yeah. So the first time we had fish was actually when I was very little indeed, like 2, 3, something like that. We had goldfish in a little plastic tank that lasted 20 minutes or something. Uh, and then we didn't have pets for a couple of years until we got my budgie when I was 5. He died last year, I think. He would have been 12. So we had him for a long time. But we had goldfish at around the same time as well. We got them, and they were in a plastic tank. And funnily enough, they were in that tank for 4 years. So we got them when I was 5, and then 4 years later, they were still living in like a plastic tank about yay big. They were still alive, and I kid you not, I've still got the same 2 fish.
Wow.
They're in their ponds in the garden now. Somehow they survived that. They've gone from being however big, yay size in a tiny little plastic tub to yay big now in a pond. But if I tip you over, you might be able to the fish tank's over in the corner of the
Oh yeah,
room over
very
there.
nice. Yeah.
That's I've had that for like 6 years now, but
Yeah,
yeah,
goldfish are indestructible, it seems like.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's so. And then when you started doing reptile videos, did you immediately start realizing that the information out there, or I guess because the good information has always been there, it's just not been popular. So did you always think that there wasn't enough people talking about it?
Well, when I started out myself, as you can probably guess, from most people my age and using the internet, those videos that I did see had the biggest influence. There was no like reading books, a little book like Yay Big that you get from a pet shop doesn't influence you as much in what decision you're going to make as that YouTuber who puts up a 10-minute video every day and tells you that this is what you should do. So I won't mention the name, but you can probably guess which YouTube channel I'm thinking of when I say massive YouTube channel influences loads of people. And I sort of believed that. I mean, how old was I? I would have been 11 or 12 or something when I got my first leopard gecko. And you can still go back and see the videos. I used to keep in one of those plastic exoterraformariums.
This is the leopard gecko.
Yeah, the first one had. She's died now, which, goes to show how well that method of keeping them works. But, paper towels, plastic plants, no thermostat, nothing like that. But throughout the years, that really irritated me in a sense, that I was trusting somebody and this was the information that I was getting and this is what everybody else followed. But things, if you just question them, don't make sense. So people would say, don't light a leopard gecko because they are nocturnal, it'll hurt their eyes, they'll go blind, you're doing them no harm. But I suppose in the case because I was younger, I've not been brainwashed in a way into just following what people say. So, the story of the Emperor's New Clothes and that, I was thinking, if you can't put lights on them in captivity, why are they all not blind in the wild? Simple as that. And then if you can't put them on a loose substrate, well, I am fairly certain that the ground out in the wild is not flat and level and completely solid. So why are they alive in the wild at all? It didn't make sense. And then I think it was sort of 2016 time when I kept hearing things that I thought didn't make sense, but I was being told them again and again and again. And I sort of, from then on, started seeking out better information and realizing that my inclination not to just believe things, to be irritated by something that didn't make sense, was right. Because as we now know, for people in the know, that method of keeping is not the best way to do it.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because you must be you're like in that first generation of people who would have learned on how to care for reptiles on YouTube, because and you're at that perfect age where you're 11 and 12 years old, so you're super impressionable, and this is when YouTube would have just been starting to bud. Like many people who are maybe in their 30s, their early days in reptiles would have been like books and whatnot, or learning from other people. So you're actually part of that first crop of kids who would have used YouTube as a resource. And like you said, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking this must be right, but then you start criticizing the ideas and wondering, wait a minute, this doesn't seem correct.
Yeah, because you got to remember as well that I'm Northwest England. The only wild herps that I've ever seen, like around the spot, are common frogs, nothing else. No reptiles, none of the other amphibians. I've never seen any of our native newts. There's only like, well, I suppose it's arguable, but around about 6 or 7 native reptiles. There's a couple of well, not just reptiles, including the amphibians. There's a couple of invasive species as well, but they're all like down south and up north. So it's not like I could just go out and catch them and put them in a box and talk with friends about how they've done it. It's just, they don't exist. So my only option is like exotic species. So leopard geckos, bearded dragons, corn snakes. they're the only things that are available to me. And so the only way I could find out about them would either be through books or through the internet. And books cost money, the internet you've already got. So it's no brainer of what I was going to do.
Yeah, exactly. And being a kid, obviously the visual aspect of the video is so exciting and everything. So I kind of had a similar story as well, because I do often feel like an outsider in the hobby, because I don't have a ton of experience in the reptile industry. I only have the 6 animals, and even though I've had reptiles for maybe over a decade now, it's never been in the capacity of like breeding and being part of that really industrialized side of the hobby. So when I started questioning it as well, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I remember posting on forums, and like my first cue to see that something was wrong was the amount of animals I saw on classifieds of people buying animals and then putting them back for sale and realizing that they weren't caring for them properly. So it is interesting when you look at the hobby from an outsider perspective, what you would have been doing as well, right? You mentioned the emperor's no clothes, right? It's just like you start questioning things that people have been seeing as real facts for a very long time. So in terms of your care, what were some of so you had the leopard gecko, you had it in this, what you would probably consider incorrect care at that point.
Incorrect, one word for it.
What are some of the first things that you addressed? Like, what was the very first aspect of the care that you were thinking, okay, I'm going to change this and go against the mainstream?
Well, I think it started off with enclosure size. So the enclosure I had her in was one of those large flat Exoterra faunarium things, the flashy ones, which I think is like 45 by 30 centimeters, which I'm not sure. Is that about the base dimensions of a 10-gallon or something?
Yeah, that would be close. Yeah, that would be close, I think.
Yeah, so I had her in that, and she used to want to come out the enclosure. She never used to eat this leopard gecko. I'm quite sure she had metabolic bone disease right the way through her life because her jaw would never close properly. That was from when I had her at the very start. She always had that, and it never went away, and she never ate. So there's definitely something wrong all the way through. But she used to sort of scratch and want to come out all the time. So then I was thinking, this idea that reptiles live in burrows and dens and don't want to come out and they only need a small space, that was the first thing that irritated me. And then there was also the idea of underbelly heating, so just having a heat mat. I thought well, heat always comes from above in nature. You can get hot rocks and so on, outside, but the main form of heat has got to be from above because it's the sun. It doesn't take a genius to work that one out. So then I had a heater with a ceramic heat emitter. And then it was a couple of years after that I thought I was sort of starting to get into the notion of ultraviolet lighting, but I didn't understand it enough, or I hadn't read enough about it to be convinced that it was going to work. So I then put her into a proper glass Exoterra and went back to the heat mat heating because I wasn't sure how to set up just having a heater over the top. I know it sounds so simple, but I can't remember how old I was, whether I was 14 or something. So it was just sort of messing, and I thought a heat mat will be easier. I'll just go for that. And then after that, it was the UV bulb, and then I started getting interested in going bioactive. And I added the loose substrate in, and then I added the overhead heater back in. And then after that leopard gecko died. I think that was the prolonged use of just the heat mat on its own, actually, because it's not warm here. And just a single heat mat on a thermostat, you're getting a surface up to 30 degrees. Getting the surface up to 30 degrees is not getting the animal up to 30 degrees. There was no short wavelength infrared, barely any visible light, no UV for long enough. And I think that just pushed what was probably already an unhealthy animal over the edge, which sounds really bad. But I have to admit that because it's like a story of my development, how doing things the way that I was told to and was told that would be correct did not work. That is the only reptile out of the 12 that I've owned that has ever died. And it is also the only one that I've ever had prolonged feeding issues from. The other feeding issue I've actually had was with my corn snake when I used to keep him with a heat mat, with plastic plants, and in a small setup and all that. Now he's in a 5 by 2 by 2 foot bioactive enclosure with UV lighting, incandescent lights to heat him. He eats every time, no problem. So,
Yeah, it's amazing how those myths and I mean, if you go back 10 years, the way you keep a ball python, the way you keep a leopard gecko, as a keeper, you almost can't deviate from it because you think, okay, UV is going to hurt their eyes. They absolutely need belly heat. And, one of the terms I often use now is like that, that meme, taking the red pill. And it's almost what we're doing now is like there's an awakening in the hobby and realizing that all of this stuff that is like breeder recommendations is not going to give you the maximum health of the animal. And it's hard to change people's minds on that, especially because better care often equals more money to be spent, and they want to deviate back to the basic minimum because it's cheaper.
Yeah, I think one of these things with relying on YouTube as a source is that people don't seem to realize that a video or a YouTube channel doesn't do well based on the quality of the information it gives. Mm-hmm. It does well based on how it performs as an entertainment service.
Exactly.
So you'll know if I say like the key phrase best pet reptile, you could probably name a YouTube channel that makes lots of videos with that in the title. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that that channel is doing well because the information in those videos is particularly good. All it means is that the person running that channel has found a keyword that people search a lot, put that in lots of the videos, lots of the descriptions. And so when any of the thousands or millions of people search that channel comes up, that channel does well. The next person comes along and sees that channel's doing well. They watch that, think, oh, everybody else has watched it. That must be the correct information. But it doesn't work like that. It's viewed as a business, and its success is completely apart to the quality of the information in it. And so when you're looking at it, you can't just trust it.
Mm-hmm. That is exactly right. And that is one of the hugest issues with social media and YouTube is that often our natural inclination is to associate the size of the amount of followers with the authority and the knowledge that they have. Like to take an example that's totally out of the reptile world, you can find hundreds or thousands of Instagram accounts that are dedicated towards fitness, and they have all these great pictures and they have millions of followers or hundreds of thousands of followers. Their ability to grow followers on Instagram is associated with their ability to post pictures and create good hashtags, and not with the fact that they can create good exercise programs or even know anything about exercise. But people will flock to it because they're like, oh, they have 300,000 followers, they must be good. No, they're good at Instagram. They're not necessarily good at physical activity. The reptile world is the same.
Yeah, it seriously is. I mean, the only videos on my channel that have done really well have actually been morph videos. So one of the things that I used to search when I was looking at getting reptiles for the first time those years ago is I would search for morphs lists. So I'd search leopard gecko morphs or corn snake morphs or something. And then you would want to see those videos where they sort of showed you photos and you could find out what they were. So when I had my own channel, one of the things that I did fairly early on was make those videos for myself, because not keeping many reptiles, that was really an easy thing to do. All you have to do is go on the internet, find some written out list of the morphs, and then nick some photos off Google and put them into a video for 2 minutes on a slideshow. And you've done the video that people are going to search for. Now, those videos on my channel are still up. They're still years old, and 2 of them are approaching 80,000 views, which is massively above anything else that I've ever had. But those videos were only made in half an hour sessions some night after I'd come home from school. Videos are put up now that maybe only get 300 views or something, might take 4 days to produce, multiple phone calls to people that really know what they're talking about, and hours and hours and hours of research just in the background. Whether a video does well or not has got nothing to do with the quality of the information in it. It is literally just the ability of the person making the video to set the tags up, to get the search engine optimization, to title it and to thumbnail it.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. So now at some point your channel, I'm sure you've directed it towards, improving care and giving good information. When did you make that choice? Because before it was more like you just sort of documenting your animals, and then it seemed like there's your theme of your channel has now changed to, good care essentially, or increasing the knowledge in the hobby. Was there a point in time where you said, I'm going to make this change, or did it just slowly happen?
It was sort of always in the back of my mind from the very early days, like fish keeping and so on. It was always there. But I think I got my crested gecko. When did I get him? It was December 2016. And I'd been planning to go bioactive and do all, things like that with my leopard gecko before she died. And that was 2017. And then that was the 31st of January that she died, I think. I can remember that date quite clearly out of all of them. But then it was for my birthday that year, which was in June, that I did my first bioactive setup, which is my crested gecko's enclosure, which is there. It's not the same now, like all the plants have changed and stuff. I'm changing out which ones have grown the best and so on. But after I'd sort of done that first setup, it sort of continued to where I knew when I had my next leopard gecko, who I'd got in the February, like a couple of weeks after my first one died, Speckles, who I've still got now, I wanted to do him a bioactive enclosure, and I did do one. And then soon after that, it was me corn snake's enclosure. That was his turn. He got one. Then my bearded dragon had one, like, the next year, fairly shortly after I set him up in a quarantine setup. So I only had him maybe a month. And then after I'd sort of developed doing it my own way, like I was all about bioactive from that time. I thought bioactive, bang on, you do a bioactive setup and you're keeping it right. I'd seen it for myself. I'd seen my first leopard gecko start off and just slowly over the years get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until she died. But when I was putting my animals in bioactive enclosures, they behaved more like animals, and they would eat, they would come out, they would go under the UV. They just seemed healthier. And it sort of validated all the concerns and questions that I'd had for years before, to where it just sort of, even the bioactive, I started questioning it. It's like, why is adding invertebrates to the substrate? Why is that particularly good? I still do it now, but to sort of move on a little bit of a tangent, I actually don't think anymore that just a bioactive enclosure is the be all and end all to reptile keeping. It's not. I think nowadays, I think that heating and lighting is very much more important than that. But I think that bioactivity is a very useful tool. It allows you to create a naturalistic and intricate setup without, it gives you a freedom to set it up as intricately and as complicated as you want for the animal, without you then thinking that you're going to have to tear it apart and clean it. So there is a bonus to it, but as you get into these things, is what I'm trying to say, you start to realize that it's not as simple as one key thing is the answer. There is loads of different key points that you need to nail, you need to get bang on. And the more of those that you understand and the more of those that you implement into your hobby, the more improvements that you're going to start seeing.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. So let's talk about some of those key points. I think you're absolutely right. The heating and the lighting is so important. Maybe should we start with heating? And this is a topic that I've talked about on the podcast a few times, but I think it's constantly good to continuously remind people the aspects of heating and lighting, because it is confusing, especially if you're someone that just came from the pet store and they said you don't need a light, and then you start looking at lighting and you're like, okay, UVA, UVB, different levels of radiation, and it's very confusing. So maybe let's start with heating, and we will explain. You just did a great video on heating as well. You have a couple great videos on heating. Yeah, so let's talk about, maybe should we just start with the definitions between convection, conduction, and radiation, and kind of go from there?
Well, I think the best.
Or is that too far down the road?
Yeah, that's too far for me. I think that what people need to do is forget what they think light is and forget what they think heat is, because it's when you start to reconcile the new information with what you think you know, that's when it gets complicated. If you can take a step back and think of it as something brand new, it's actually not that hard. So basically,
actually, I want to stop you on that point, because that's an excellent point. And is that something that you did yourself to get to make yourself understand it? Like, was that a natural thing that happened to you? Just sort of erase what you know, and like the Men in Black style, forget everything you know, and then relearn it? Or how did that come about? Because that's a really great point.
I don't think it was so much conscious as something that I'm just used to doing, in a sense, because I'm quite, I like me biology and I like me science and stuff, and I can do a bit of maths, but with those, to understand them fully, you have to realize that there is a jargon. There are words that mean something in a particular topic that have their own specific set definition that doesn't quite feel the same as what you think it does in day-to-day talk. So when we go into the idea of heat, you think, okay, so you have a temperature, which is a measure of how warm something is, and the warmer something is, well, you feel more of that warm feeling, right? It's as simple as that. But the thing to understand is that heat and energy are more or less the same thing. Heat is just a subset of energy. So, like you say, radiation, conduction, and convection. Heat, i.e. this form of energy, can take three different forms, subforms, if you like. Radiation is like little photons which have a wavelength, and they sort of fly about in the air and, well, not fly about, but straight lines. Or I'm not a physicist. This is just my understanding of it. Mm-hmm. So like radiation, you can think of as it just being little tiny packets of energy, those photons, being bandied about between different molecules. One molecule will take one up, and then it'll start to vibrate. And after a bit, it can then pop off the energy in the form of another photon, which can go and whiz away somewhere and make another molecule vibrate about. And
I guess it's important to say that the vibration is what will create the increased temperature.
Yeah, so that's what you feel as the temperature. So if it's in a gas or a liquid, so together they make up fluids, then that results in convection, because as the molecules vibrate about, they tend to occupy a greater volume, and so it becomes the fluid becomes less dense and rises and takes with it that heat energy. So that's the effect of convection. But then if it's in a solid, it is conduction. It's just sort of spread between them, because obviously a molecule or particle in a solid it vibrates about a point, as we know. So it just bumps into the next one and spreads the heat along. But the just plain old heat in the form of vibrating molecules, that can be provided very simply. To warm a reptile up is not difficult. A heat map can do that. You can send those vibrations away. Fine. But what you can't do is what the radiation is capable of doing, which is when the radiation interacts with a particular molecule and causes it to vibrate in a particular way. That is where you start to see different effects. So the easiest example of this is visible light. So visible light just constitutes a subset of radiation, and it is we have evolved to have molecules that vibrate in such a way when these wavelengths interact with them, that this leads to a whole signal transduction. Transduction, is that the right word? I think so.
Yeah.
I've not read this in a while. But you get a whole thing going on, in the retina, rod cells, cone cells, and so on. And that leads to the perception of the radiation, which we call vision. There's not something super duper special about this radiation. It's just a particular set of it. If we evolved in a different way, where different wavelengths were more prominent, we would probably be receptive to those. To say that we see them, I almost don't like to say see or what is visible, because people have that preconceived idea of what visible and seeing means. But what sight really is just being able to detect that radiation. Now, I sort of haven't really planned how I'm saying this, so I might be saying it a bit fuzzily, but hopefully you get the point. That
No, I'm definitely following you, and you're right. It's because seeing is such an innate thing. We see and we define it in a totally different way than just realizing it's a very narrow bandwidth of energy that's flying at us from the sun, and we can actually detect a tiny. It's actually scary to see how little of the electromagnetic spectrum we can visually see. It's a tiny little sliver, and the rest of it around us is just, it's still here. We just can't see it.
Yeah, well,
with our eyes.
Yeah, you suppose you can definitely feel UV.
That's right.
But when you sort of realize that, okay, we have heat, it's bandied about between molecules, either as direct bumping between them, which is the vibration, or sent about like in a straight direct manner as radiation through the photons. And those photons are able to interact in particular ways. So we've just discussed sight, but it can also interact with different molecules, not just like the rhodopsin and conopsins in the eyes. It's also like pre and pro-vitamin D going to D3. There's like, which one is it? I think it's pre-vitamin D that interacts with UVB, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But that particular vibration is another thing that particular wavelength, the subset of heat that is radiation, is capable of doing. And each different wavelength has been, how would I say it? It's been, species have evolved to utilize the wavelengths. So they've sort of taken advantage of, in a sense, this form of energy, because why not? It's going to help them survive. So different wavelengths. I want to be careful how I say this, you see, because I would say different wavelengths have different effects and impacts on an animal. But that takes away some of the meaning, because when I say has different effects, it makes you think that it's sort of a random consequence, a happy consequence, in fact, that UVB can aid in D3 production. But it is no happy consequence. Animals have evolved to utilize it. There is no mistake there, no happy consequence. As part, I won't say any more on that because I'm going to overcomplicate it without a script. But basically, to narrow it down, there is energy available in radiation. The different wavelengths have different effects because animals have evolved to make use of them. And this is where it starts to come into its importance in captivity, because you aren't just missing out on something that, it might be there, they might use it, whatever. No, they've evolved to use it. They have an evolved need to use it, and therefore they have a need for it.
Yeah, exactly. And you can think of it in the same way as the visible light. Like, we evolved to see this band of visible light, and we use it because it allowed us to survive. For whatever reason, the narrow bandwidth of our visible light is what we use to evolve over time. Now, there are other animals that have a wider range of visible light, and imagine cutting some of that off. Like, imagine for us, if we just eliminated all the reds or something, which you could theoretically do if you didn't supply the correct visible light, which would be sort of a horrible experience for a human.
Yeah, well, I suppose the interesting thing, actually, is that we're used to thinking of birds, and especially diurnal reptiles, as having a broader range of wavelengths that we can see. So seeing into UVA and even infrared A on like the opposite ends of the scale, we can see the visible light in the middle. They can see into the bits on the end. And sort of the reasoning for this is that during the age of the reptiles, the dinosaurs, as it were, they were able to, be awake in the day. mammals, as the classical story goes, were sort of shuttling about under the shadows of the dinosaurs and were typically nocturnal animals. So our direct ancestors during that time didn't really have a need for like vision because it was too dark. And so I think the thought is that we went down from having, say, 5 or something, like some species of chelonian have, and 5 different proteins and photoreceptor pigments that we were able to synthesize. They were sort of lost because they were just a waste producing them for our nocturnal ancestors. But then after the dinosaurs were wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs were wiped out in the KPG mass extinction, it then opened up that use for vision again. And so since then, mammals have had to pick back up different photoreceptor pigments, which is why, we are visually driven animals as human beings, but we only have, we're 4 in total different photoreceptor pigments, the 3 ones for the cone cells and the 1 for the rod cells. So we've had to build that back up, which, is a reasoning why our vision is completely locked into those wavelengths, and the sauropsids are able to see further.
Yeah, and that is the environment we want to replicate in captivity because it's what they're evolved to see and utilize, and it's crucially important that we offer that. So in terms of the heat, what do you recommend? What are you using to heat the animals that you have at home?
Well, I'm slightly aware of the politics of what I'm about to say, but I now use just tungsten filament lamps, which, that's just a bog standard incandescent bulb. You might be able to see up there in the top left, there's a little glow of red. That's because in a video I did a while ago, I absolutely destroyed the red bulbs you can get, but I thought I've never actually used one. So I'm trialing that out on the Cresty at the minute. But for the rest of my other reptiles, I've just got those standard old-fashioned filament house lamps. I've got loads that are just £1 each from a corner shop. I don't think they're actually allowed to sell anymore. They're just legacy stuff they were getting rid of. But those, they do a brilliant job. They provide the near infrared, so there's plenty of infrared A. There is a good amount of infrared B. It's sort of in a similar relative levels to the sun, which is what you want. They provide lots of visible light as well. The wavelengths that the reptiles too are able to see to initiate basking. So it's such a simple and cheap bit of equipment, but we've had it the whole time.
Yeah. And I guess that's why I want to make sure that people understand that those light bulbs, which are your regular light bulb or a halogen bulb, we still can buy halogen bulbs here, tungsten lamps.
Yeah.
They're not illegal yet, I guess, but they provide that radiation in terms of the infrared A and the infrared B, and that's what we're talking about. Those are the photons that go into the animal's body and vibrate the molecules in a way that a heat mat, which would be just conduction because you have an animal laying on top of a heat mat, it can't do.
Well, the thing is as well is that it's going back to this idea of removing any preconceived ideas. So even it's only the past couple of months I've sort of realized this, is that if I say heat and ask you to give a wavelength, you would say infrared, right? That is, infrared is heat. Well, so's visible light, so's UV. You can warm an animal up using visible light. A particular example, I was talking about this with someone, is actually melanin, so the dark pigment. That absorbs shorter wavelengths like UV much better than it absorbs infrared. And so when a bearded dragon turns dark in the morning, it's heating itself up by absorbing more UV and visible light, not infrared. It's all heat. Radiation is all heat. It's just the different effects that the wavelengths can have. And those near infrared wavelengths are, they have different, an interaction with the pineal eye or the pineal eye. I'm not sure how to say it. It's what happens when you only read these things. But interactions with that, there's also like healing effects. There's all these things that the different wavelengths do, and one of them, infrared, is not just heat. They are all heat. It is the effects of, like, for example, healing or the D3 production. It is those effects that are different between the wavelengths, not necessarily the heating up ability, if you like.
Yeah, it's I think even with the way we discuss it, when we separate heating and lighting into two different categories, it does make things even more confusing. Like if we just think of it as it's all the same spectrum with just different wavelengths, and as you get to the longer wavelengths with less energy, you're moving into the infrared side, and the higher energy, that's your ultraviolet. I mean, that's sort of the band that we're dealing with energy that makes its way to the Earth. There are way more bands on either side when you get into X-rays and gamma rays and microwaves. Those aren't hitting us on Earth, but when we think of them as two separate... What's that?
Thank goodness.
Yeah, yes. We wouldn't be here if those were hitting us. So it's one of those... when we separate them into two categories, we do completely separate them, and they're two different things, but they're really not. They are the same exact thing. It's just how we perceive them that's different.
Yeah, it's just all radiation. It's just heat. Just particular bits of it can do different special things, like activate photoreceptor pigments in our eyes, letting us see, like interacting with previtamin D and making D3 for us, which is nice. And, healing effects. There's all sorts of other things. I'm not going to pretend that I know or understand all of them, but it's just the basic general idea of something not being separate. So UV isn't just D3, it is heat as well. Visible light is not just seeing things, it is heat. Infrared is not just heat, it is, well, heat and healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think what we'll do is you have some really amazing videos. I'll just point people towards those because those are where you really get into good detail. And I think they're good explanation videos. But just to finish off on one more point about this topic is your heat sources that are not emitting light are very weak sources of radiation. So your heat mats and your ceramic heat bulbs, you can't see. If we could see further down the spectrum, you would be able to see the light, but we can't. And that's a good signal for us to know that that's a very weak wavelength. And since it's a weak wavelength, it's not going to penetrate the animal's body as deeply as the wavelengths that we can see. I think that's kind of a simple way to tie it into a knot.
Yeah, so you've got what we call a black body emitter, right? Is when you take any old object and get it warm, you heat it up, all those particles and molecules are all vibrating like mad, and they start popping off photons. Now, depending how much heat energy it's got, so like how much of this vibration's going on, dictates what wavelengths, what types of photons are going to come off. The hotter something is, the more energy is lost in photons, and so it is those higher energy photons in the shorter wavelengths. Now, when an object is hot, it loses photons with wavelengths right across the electromagnetic spectrum, but with a peak somewhere. Now, the hotter that object is, the further into the shorter wavelengths that peak will be. So if you get something hot enough, then the peak will be, in UV. It won't be in visible light or infrared. It will, go completely over. I suppose you could go further and further, go into UVB, go into UVC, and so on. But it's the whole thing is given off with that peak somewhere. So if you just heat up a filament and you can see visible light in it, then or visible light coming from that peak, from the hot object, then you know for a fact that the emission curve, is spreading off into the longer wavelengths. So with our tungsten filament lamps, you can see plenty of visible light, but it's got that sort of shift towards orange. So you can immediately infer that the peak will be a slightly longer wavelength, i.e. in the near infrared. Carbon filament heat, on the other hand, is only going to show any visible light at all when it's at its highest temperature. So when that peak is as far into the short wavelengths as it's going to go. And that tells you that the full peak is going to be somewhere in infrared B. And then if you're heating element, you can't see any visible light at all, then you know that the peak of the emission is going to be way further into the longer wavelengths. And so those benefits, that are benefits only because the animals have evolved to utilize the wavelengths, are not then going to be met with those heating thingios. So that is why they are not suitable.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I think if people go check out your videos, you have this some really great explanation videos. So that is great. I think that should give people some good information, as well as if they go to your videos, because you actually have some cool animations on your videos as well. How are you doing that? I mean, they're simple, but they're definitely helpful.
Well, I suppose it's tricks of the trade, isn't it? But I'm not going to lie. Mostly just like a simple photo editing software, and then I mean, all of the stuff like the photo editing software and video editing software is free, but it's basically just bending and stretching things. There's no cartoon animation-y sort of things. It's literally just keyframes, expanding the X direction, expanding the Y direction, and spend a couple of hours messing about with it. And I don't know. I hope people understand what they mean.
No, the animations are great, and for people that don't edit video, even something simple like that does take a lot of time to do, to set the keyframes and make things slide across the screen. And because these topics are relatively complicated, especially for many people who haven't even thought about it before, it's very helpful.
Oh, good. I mean, I try and make things as simple as possible. I mean, it takes a long time to think about and then to set it up. Like some of the shots where I show like photons flying out the sun, they take like 2 hours just for a couple of circles to fly across the screen, but with those, I do try and make them simple, just show as much detail as is required and no more. So for example, whenever I do graphs and stuff, I tend to try and leave units off because people get afraid of maths when they really don't have to be. But like just showing things in words and showing things pictorially just makes things make sense a bit in my mind.
Yeah, no, definitely. It definitely does. So I have a few questions about your animals that you keep, because you pretty much keep everything bioactive. And one of the things that you don't see a lot of right now are bioactive enclosures for snakes. And you have your corn snake as well as Chinese leopard snakes, which is I don't think anybody, I've never even seen one of these. So I didn't even really know what it was when I first saw it on your channel, but they sort of just resemble a corn snake.
Yeah.
In terms of, tell me about the bioactive setup for the corn snake. What are you doing with substrate and just kind of take it from there?
Well, the substrate's a bit of a sort of random amalgamation of stuff, to be honest. I started off with the Arcadia Earth Mix Arid in there, and I was trying to grow plants and stuff, but corn snakes don't mix well with plants. They just crush them. So I had that. But then I didn't really have enough of it, and so I just like dumped some coconut fiber on top, and then I've got absolutely loads and loads of leaves in there. I don't, buy leaves. I just don't get the point. Why would you spend 20 quid on 10 litres of leaves? It doesn't, it's an exaggeration, but it's absolutely mad. I just go out and fill loads of bin bags with them, and then pour a bit of boiling water over them just in case, just to be safe. And I put that in, and over time, the cleanup crew breaks that down, and that is basically what the substrate is.
Are you spot cleaning the enclosure?
Yeah. Well, my corn snake, actually, people feed snakes far too often, in my opinion.
I agree.
My corn snake, I feed him every 3 to 4 weeks, rather than every 1 or 2 weeks that most people seem to do it. And because of that, when I like take him out of his enclosure, usually the movement stimulates him a bit, so he tends to go outside his enclosure anyway. But for any bioactive enclosure, if you do like get feces in there, then particularly for snakes, not all of it is going to get broken down. So there's usually like hair and feathers and things that don't get digested, and the cleanup crew doesn't touch that in my experience. So you do have to take that out. And then this goes for any reptile. The white parts and the urate crystals, they do need to be removed. Nothing's going to touch them. They're just going to sit there forever. So I sort of, after he's gone, I just sort of leave it in there for maybe a day or two to let the cleanup crew break down what they can, and then what's left I take out. It's just as simple as that, really.
Yeah, that's the thing with snakes is they do produce quite an extraordinary amount of waste, and so it is more than most cleanup crews can handle. So I was just curious about that, and yeah, I totally agree that there is a serious issue with people feeding their animals way too much. These are animals that are just designed to survive on very little, and because they're ectotherms, they don't need a lot of energy. They're getting most of that from the visible light.
It is a mistake I've made, overfeeding. With my male leopard gecko particularly, is the greediest little thing I have ever known. But in the brumation period, because I do brumate all my reptiles that are capable of doing it, I sent him down with my corn snake for a whole 5 months, the winter just gone. So he didn't eat anything for that whole period. And then he got up in March, I think. And since March, I have fed him one insect every 2 weeks. And the rate of his loss of weight has been so small, because in the past, I definitely fed him too much and he was definitely quite overweight. So this year I decided, right, I am going to get him down. So that's what I thought, quite a drastic diet plan, one insect a fortnight. But in however many months of feeding him that, he looks nearly the same.
Have you put him on a scale to see if he's lost any grams?
No, because funnily enough, what I used to do with handling reptiles as well was, if I fancied on one particular occasion to go and take the reptile out of the enclosure, then I would open the doors, lift the hide up and yank them out, and then have a mess about with them and then put them back in. That's what I did, and that's what most people do. But I don't do that anymore. I let them ask me when they want to come out rather than forcing them to do it, because leopard geckos especially seem to be very intelligent when it comes to wanting to be held. The 2 females that I got in February both ask me when they want to come out. And just doing the same with my male leopard gecko, who I've had for several years, like starting to do the same, allow him to ask me when he wants to come out. Rather than taking him out to weigh him when I fancy it, I let him come out on his own terms, and he's already caught on. He doesn't come out as often as the females do, because he's a bit of a lazy get, but he's getting there, and he's definitely learning. But whilst I can see that he is losing weight slowly, I don't think it's that important to weigh him, if you know what I mean. It's just irritating him, taking him out of his enclosure for my own interest rather than his wants.
Yeah, the idea of choice-based care is something that I've been trying to practice as well, and it is, I think, really important to develop that relationship with the animal, that so they realize that you're not just going to go in there and just crank them out of the enclosure and freak them out. And eventually animals do learn to show that they want to come out. Like my boas do it all the time. They'll come to the front of the glass and I'll just open the door and they'll come out and they'll just cruise around and then they go back in when they're done. It's pretty interesting. So I'm really curious about your Weight Watchers plan for your leopard gecko, because it's amazing that he's still maintaining weight after even a brumation. So actually, first I want to talk about the brumation, because that's something that really only breeders do to stimulate the breeding process. But I think if I had an animal that would go into brumation, I would do it as well, because I like to mimic as much of nature as possible. So tell me how the process you use to bring them both, the corn snake and whatever else you're brumating.
Well, the thing for me is the majority of it, the effort is taken away, because I've thought about this before I was going to do it. I just let the natural weather seasons and weather changes do it for me, in a sense, because I'm from a completely temperate zone. So, the daylight lengths do change drastically throughout the year. And my reptile room, if you want to call it that, is completely unheated. There's no central heating there. And it is relatively poorly insulated. It's like a garage that never has cars go in it anymore. So for allowing natural temperature changes, like ambient temperatures to change, it just happens anyway. And also, all of my reptiles are across a big window, which is an absolute nightmare for filming because of the glare in that. But it just allows the natural, the day length to just hit them. So my bearded dragon, for example, he will brumate completely on his own if I do nothing to the heating and lighting in his enclosure. My corn snake, I'm quite convinced will do the same. My leopard gecko's not been out in the main reptile room long enough for me to tell, and neither the Chinese leopard snakes. But basically all I do is I wait until October for all of the reptiles, you know, at that time, my corn snake and my bearded dragon do start slowing down. They stop being interested in food. They're both sort of healthy and alert, and, you know, if you give them a crop, they'll check or whatever. But from then, that is when I start to step in to give them the helping hand. So having thermostats for this is, you know, it's just another bonus of having thermostats. I can go and change the temperature by like 0.5 degree Celsius a day. And then also reduce the length of time that the lights are on, like 6 minutes a day I do it or something. So 6 minutes at the start of the day, 6 minutes at the end. And over the course of the month, that leaves me with just the lights on for 6 hours, and the temperatures go down to like 10 degrees or something like that, depending on the animal. So, for example, my leopard gecko, I cooled him down to 13 degrees and he was still active. So I cooled him right down to 9 degrees Celsius. And it was only then that he sort of gave in and went asleep. But basically, the majority of the effort is just let nature take its course. And then once the animals start showing the signs, I help them along using the thermostats and the different lighting periods. It's sort of, I think the biggest epiphany with the hibernation to me is that you let the animal do what it wants and follow them, help them do it. Don't send them into brumation. Just let them go in and just help them along, and then you don't have any problems.
So when they end up, slowing down and they end up going to sleep, do they, especially the corn snake and the leopard gecko, do they just find a spot and do they stay there the whole time, or will they still move around throughout the brumation period and find a different spot?
That's an interesting question, actually. My bearded dragon stays in one spot. He's like extra sort of picky. He'll go into one spot. He'll, before he's going to make a big decision to sleep for all, like, he doesn't sleep for a full 5 months. What he does is he'll dig a big hole, go and lie in that, and he will stay there for almost bang on 3 months. And then no matter what I do with the temperatures or the lighting throughout that, 3 months later, I'll see him. He'll just be up and he'll be sat underneath where his heat lamp is, and he will just wait. And then over the course of the next month, I will slowly do that ramping up phase. So it's like the same again, where you let the animal take charge and just facilitate what their natural behavior is. Whereas the leopard gecko and corn snake, they do it quite differently. So they're a little bit more controlled by what I do than my bearded dragon is. So they will only fully hunker down once I've finished the cooling period and so on. But once they've done that, they'll basically stay in the same spot. They sort of shift around in the same hive. That is particularly the case of the leopard gecko, but my corn snake actually will come out. On a couple of occasions, I've got some videos of this on my Instagram, I think, where he came out and actually sat underneath this UV lamp for a couple of hours. Even though it was 10 degrees in his enclosure, he will come out, sit there for a few hours, and then go straight back into that hide, and that's where he'd stay for another fortnight.
So in terms of, do you have any external heat on at that time? Like you don't have any of the bulbs on?
Oh no, I do.
Okay.
Because it does get that cold. It can get down to 2 degrees Celsius. Mm-hmm. And, for my bearded dragon, for example, I wouldn't want him getting that cold. So at that time in the winter, that's when I do switch to the non-light emitting. That's what historically I've done. I've switched to the non-light emitting heaters. So I can put deep heat projectors in or ceramic heat emitters or something, just to take away some of that urge to bask. But that's what I did the winter just gone anyway. But I think going into the next winter, I'll probably keep it the same. But basically all I've got them on the thermostats so that they're really, really dimmed and only keeping the temperature up to 10 degrees or something during the day. And during the night, just that heat that's built up throughout the day is basically going to be it. If I do need any heating at night, then, I will put the ceramics in or something. But it's just basically keeping it between 5 and 10 degrees is the only heating.
Interesting. Yeah. So there's still something maintaining some heat, but I find the idea of temperatures to be very fascinating because I think it's another thing in the hobby. I think a lot of the time we keep our animals way warmer. Like, we do want to be warming up our animals. Like, you have a hot spot in the summer for your bearded dragon. That's very hot, I'm sure. But there are points in nature when temperatures drop, nighttime gets very, very cool. And I remember talking to somebody on Facebook. They were messaging me because they were worried that their boa's enclosure was going down to. It's funny, being in Canada, all my reptile temperatures are in Fahrenheit and everything else in my life is in Celsius because everything I see is American. But she was saying that her temperatures were going down to like 70, and what is 70?
That's like 22, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And she was worried that the boa would get so cold that it wouldn't be able to move. And because that's we see them as cold-blooded creatures, they need heat to move. It's amazing how cold some of these animals get to in nature, getting down to that 12, 13, 10 degree mark, even in some tropical places, especially if there's some altitude there. And I can't imagine how much that's going to add the longevity in their life when you take 3 or 4 months of just dropping the metabolism to almost nothing.
Well, yeah, I mean, my bearded dragon, for example, he goes down at 12, 13 degrees. And the funny thing is when they're going to go into brumation, it actually seems, certainly my bearded dragon anyway, he seemed to seek that out. So the first time he did it, I was like, I wasn't really expecting him to just do it off his own bat. I hadn't done any of the cooling down period, any of the changing of the lights. It was simply just what was happening outside the window and ambient temperatures. But he just stopped heating, and then one day curled up right by the vent, one of the vents in his enclosure where it was cool. And I measured the temperature there. It was like maybe 12 degrees. It was like he decided, right, it's brumation time. I'm going to find somewhere cold, and that is where I'm going to stay. But, 3 months at 12 degrees, people would think you're going to kill the thing. But if it's healthy to start with, it's just purely natural. That's just basically it.
Yeah, it's great to go look at the climate of the place that the animal comes from, just so you can get a sense of the temperatures. I mean, you have day geckos as well. Madagascar can get really cold in the winter, so we have this temptation to want to keep everything at 85 degrees at all times, and there does need to be a good fluctuation of temperatures. So in terms of the weight, the leopard gecko losing some weight, it's amazing that he's just completely normal, hitting one insect every 2 weeks. And has he started to slim down at all, or you think that it's going to be maybe the whole summer of this until you can shed some weight?
It'll probably still be the whole summer because he's still got weight to lose. I still think he's overweight, but he definitely has lost weight. So in his tail, for example, I can see it's almost to the point where it's like a continuous thickness with his hips. But in his body, he still looks quite chubby, and his legs especially look really thick. So I'm definitely going to keep on with that diet. But I think as well that's sort of helping is I added the background in there, and recently I've not shown this on video that yet, but I have added some branches and things. I'm just allowing him something to explore and climb around is definitely helping. And you start to see behaviours that you just don't see. So I already kept him in the same bioactive enclosure, but before I had the background of that, he obviously never climbed because there was nothing to climb. But actually in the last week, every single day, for about 3 hours in the morning after his lights come on, he would climb right to the top of the background, sit there, go to sleep for a couple of hours, climb back down, and then finish the rest of the day off in the hang. And I really do not have a clue why he was doing that. He's not done it this week, or the past 2-3 days anyway, but it's just all these behaviors are just that movement of that moving around that he would not be doing in a sterile enclosure. Not only is that helping him lose weight just because it's simple movement, but it is something for him to do.
Yeah, it is so key to give them the opportunity to climb and dig and explore, because especially with reptiles, it's very tough to make them lose weight. They hold on to those fat bodies with all their might. Like, it's very tough to start burning those. And one of the ways, like you said, is giving them exercise. And the background that you've done for the leopard gecko enclosure, I'll point everybody to go check that out, because it is so cool. It's just essentially just pieces of cork bark, or cork rounds, or cork pieces, I guess, that you fix to the wall. Yeah, and it just looks so cool, and it gives the animal so much traction. I'm sure it's very easy for him to sort of scale that wall.
Yeah, I've seen him. There's a bit on the left-hand side of the enclosure that's nearly vertical. I was just putting it in because I thought it was mainly aesthetic, really. I didn't want to like have it jutting out too much in case it sort of obstructed getting my hands into the enclosure. But I've seen him scale it, like go straight up the vertical wall. Originally, I put that background in because I knew I was getting the two females and I was going to be cohabbing. So I was sort of wanting to add a space where if they wanted to get away from each other, that they could. I didn't really expect him to use it to the extent he has, though. So, I am extra glad that I've put it in there now.
Have you added the two females to that enclosure yet?
No, they're like over there, which I would show you, but if I move the camera, I don't get internet connection down there. But no, I'm growing those out slightly. They're approaching 50 grams now, and they're pretty much slowing down. But I want to give it like another 2 or 3 months just to get them up to size. And also, I'm doing the experiment with the calcium sand that everybody's been tearing me head off for. So just to give people something to think about, I've got 2 leopard geckos in the same enclosure with UVB lighting, overhead heating, and calcium sand. So,
you've ticked every box there.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I know the calcium sand, you've actually done a video on explaining maybe you could give us the Cole notes on why you're doing that with the calcium sand.
Well, I wouldn't say too much because I've actually got another, how should we say, extreme video coming out about calcium sand relatively soon that I've not filmed yet. But I think the thing that I want to focus on there is not to say that calcium sand is a brilliant substrate, because it is not a brilliant substrate. It is completely unfit for use. But the thing is with it is that although the substrate is not good, it is not the sole cause of all of the problems that it is blamed with causing. To basically summarize, if you keep your reptile in the same manner as you would keep a sandwich, you put it in a plastic box and don't heat it, which is what most people do with the reptiles. And then you throw some like minor risk factor at it, and then it starts to have a problem like impaction. Well, can you really blame the minor risk factor, or is it the fact that you're keeping it like a sandwich? Yeah,
it is very important that we are pointing out the actual problems that is creating the health issues. And the calcium sand argument runs along the same lines as the loose substrate argument, right? If you blame the loose substrate for the issue, then you are not addressing the actual issue, which is proper heat, proper humidity, proper diet, whatever it is. And we just ignore it. We go, we'll just eliminate that, put paper towel, but you're not fixing the problem that caused the impaction.
To go back to the heating and lighting slightly, just like think about that. The animal has evolved to utilize the full spectrum of sunlight, going from UVB through UVA through visible light through infrared A into infrared B, and then going further into infrared C, verging into conduction and convection. They have evolved to utilize all of that. What you then do is remove all of it, bar conduction and convection, and then somehow expect the animal to behave like a wild animal and be able to tolerate these things. So when we go into the wild and see that bearded dragons do live on sand, they don't get impaction, do they? Oh, well, there must be something super special about wild bearded dragons then. Well, no. There's not something special about them. It's just the fact that they've got the sun, and the ones in captivity are given inadequate lighting. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and we just point out the wrong enemy and then eliminate the ability for them to become impacted, but you don't actually solve the problem.
Yeah, it's like for example, if somebody to I don't know, fire a bomb at someone, it's like saying, wow, the bomb is the really bad thing here, but no, who fired it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we want to look at the root cause, or else we're missing the entire point. And for the enclosures that are right behind us, you have, for those that are listening just on the podcast, you have to come out to the video or just check out Joseph's Instagram. You have a crested gecko enclosure and a day gecko enclosure. How are your plants, like, it looks like a jungle in there. How are you doing that? what is going on? I wish I could make my plants grow like that.
Well, there's two things. The first is simply bright lighting, like the right spectrum, So I've got the Jungle Dawn LED bars on both of them at the minute. There's two on that one and one on that one. There's actually another type of light I'm looking at and talking about a company. Maybe I'll test it and show it you, but we'll see how that one goes. So that's the lighting. Then another like simple trick is just don't be afraid to trim things. Is one thing I've learned. Because if you let things sort of overgrow, then the plants at the base die, and you just end up with a soggy mush of dead plants, which isn't fun. But the biggest and best trick of all, I might get told off for saying, and that is that I put fertilizers in it. People go on and on and on about, oh, it's got to be organic, no fertilizers, all this stuff. But I've been putting ammonium nitrate in these tanks for a couple of months now, and it seems to work for me. I'm going to have a go at putting some potassium phosphate in there as well, get full NPK going and see what happens. But it seems to be working for me. All it is basically accelerating the rate at which the animals will be producing their own waste. As far as I can see, it's harmless and it turns the tanks nice and green. So simple trick, nice and cheap. Win-win.
Yeah. Fertilizer is definitely an interesting one. I know people do get, they probably do get kind of upset about it because they think that these are chemicals that are but a lot of times fertilizer is just, it's elements that we find in the soil anyway, and you're just adding it to the soil.
Well, yeah, I mean, the one I've been adding ammonium nitrate. I suppose ammonium's not that brilliant. The ammonium ion can be taken up by and utilized by some plants. I'm not sure if it's all plants or just leguminous. I can't remember. I think all plants can take up ammonium to some degree. Ammonia gas is not good. That's toxic to both plants and animals. But if you just like make up a solution of the stuff and leave it standing, then what's going to go out a solution is going to gas off. Nitrates are fairly harmless. You can have that up at 80, 100 parts per million in a fish tank, and it's not going to harm the fish. So if you then put that in an enclosure with a land-dwelling vertebrate, it's completely harmless. It's just the plants are going to use it and grow nice. Then like potassium salts and potassium phosphate. The potassium and phosphate ions are some of the most common biological ions. Yes, there will be a toxic dose for them, but if you're just adding it from water into solution and you're pouring it into the substrate, it's going to be a bit of a job for the reptile to get it all into its system and have a bit of an issue from it.
It would have to eat a lot.
I would be careful actually, perhaps with amphibians, because there's more of a danger there, but it's not something I've experimented with, particularly the ammonium nitrate. I guess that could be quite dangerous for frogs, but certainly for day geckos, I don't have a problem.
I think actually Arcadia does have some kind of plant fertilizer as well in their line of products. I'm not sure if you've tested that out.
The Bio Revitalizer, I've used that, but I don't know. It doesn't seem to have the immediate effects of just farmyard chems.
Yeah, interesting. Very cool. And there's a few other things that I wanted to cover. One is you have an empty spot in your reptile room that you have yet to tell us.
Yes.
Is that still a secret? I can't get that out of you. You don't have to divulge it here if you don't want to. I was just curious.
I'll give some clues.
Okay.
So it's not actually going to be a reptile that will brumate, even though it's going in the cold room. But so it is a species that likes to get cold, but it won't hibernate. That's clue number one. The next clue is that it's going to be a very heavily planted enclosure. It's going to be another one of the DMS divaria, like the Lime Day Gecko one. And then the final clue, which I can give that won't give it away too much, is that it is an African species.
Okay, those are some great clues. So it's a species that is going to be well planted. It's going to handle some cold temperature. It's from Africa. People can guess what
Yep.
that's going to be. When do you think you'll reveal that plan?
Well, I'm just waiting on, because I'm doing like another collab with DMS Viveria. They like made me that bib and sent it me. And I thought it was that good that I want to do another one on a larger scale this time. So, this is going to be a 4 by 2 by 2 foot enclosure. I'm hoping that it'll be built and I'll get it in June, and then I'll plant it up, and hopefully maybe by the end of June, an absolute push, I could have the new inhabitant there, or it might be July or possibly even August. But in any case, I am quite excited for it because one of the most popular series on my channel is Bioactive Basics. But I filmed all of that when I didn't have years of experience and I didn't have enough enclosures to show things off properly. But now I'm going to sort of remake that series, but building this enclosure up from scratch. I'm thinking of calling it Bioactive Masters, like the redone version of Bioactive Basics. So it should be fun.
That's great. I am definitely looking forward to that. And as far as pet tubers go, I know we already talked about YouTube. Was there any other points that you wanted to make regarding the pet tube community that you have chewing at you?
Well, yeah, it's the idea that a YouTube channel is a business. People who do well on YouTube, like I said earlier on, they do well not because of the quality of their information. They do well because of how good they are at YouTube, how good they are at dominating a keyword, how good they are at making titles or thumbnails, how good they are at just being a personality and being funny. Those three things. I'm thinking of 3 particular YouTube channels, which you can guess who they are. But it would be so easy for me or for you or for anybody else that's trying to teach people things just to drop what we're doing and try and make a load of money by, doing the clickbait, taking the keyword, being just completely funny or something. Like the morphs videos for me, I've seen it myself. If I wanted to start making a living off YouTube or become big on YouTube, then I would just start doing morphs lists or type lists, types a day gecko, ball python morphs lists. Just start doing things like that as a start. And then I suppose I actually had a choice back in 2018 when I set up the main reptile room. I had the choice of building the cabinet so that I could support large enclosures, then getting large enclosures in and a smaller number of reptiles and setting them up properly. I could go down that route, or I could just fill it with racks and I could maybe fit, how many could I fit in there? Maybe fit like 20, 30, 40 snakes in there, depending on how large the enclosure is. I could have done that. I could have made those videos. I could be making money breeding. I could be doing all of that, but that doesn't sit right with my conscience because I'm not a businessman. I like reptiles. I want to care for reptiles. I want to teach people how to do it. I don't profess to be very good at it. I mean, I try my best, but I'm never going to be perfect. But there was almost a conscious decision that once I started that reptile room, that was the choice. I was going to forego trying to be big on YouTube, just straight off in the quickest, easiest way possible. And I was either going to take a long route or never get there at all, which seems to be the way it's going. But at least I know that the people watching my videos are going to be better off than if they watch somebody else's. So that's at least what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I am really, and I've said this to many people that I've talked to about this privately, is that I am really hoping that one day the education side starts to trump the entertainment side. And I hope that eventually people start to realize that entertainment only has a small value. It does have a value in some cases, but when we're talking about caring for animals in our homes and creating creating habitats and whatnot, education really is the important thing. And you're so right. Any of us could flick that switch and we may not be as successful as the next pet tuber, but it would be not very difficult to create a viral video and create a viral thumbnail. And it just hurts me in my inside to even think about doing that, so it's almost like a negative feedback loop in ways when you go the education side, because not only does it take you much longer to create the videos, the amount of information you need to learn to make sure you're delivering it properly takes a ton of time, and then the viewership and the financial side doesn't come into play either. So it's you sort of have to be crazy to be making educational content on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing it for years now, and the thing that hurts about it as well is that as the keeping reptiles develops, what you have to teach people also develops. So when a couple of months ago or a couple of years ago, you've told somebody to do this, you then realize that, well, actually, no, there's a better way of doing this now. A prime example, actually, is one of the most popular videos that I did. It nearly had 16,000 views on it, was a crested gecko heating and lighting video, which I did in early 2017. And in that video, I did mention giving a heating source to a crested gecko, but I said I don't provide mine with UVB because I'm not sure that they actually need that. Lots of people do without it. So that is what I said at the time, and I now look back and say, no, they definitely do require it if you want them to thrive. So that 16,000 view video of mine, I have literally, just the other day, I've privated it because I don't support it anymore. That's knocked the total views on my channel below the 700,000 mark again. It would just be so much easier and better for me, as a business, that sort of thing, to keep that up. But I don't want to do that, if you know what I mean.
Totally. I mean, I have literally an identical situation because I have a day gecko care guide on my
this one.
And I think there's probably around 17,000 views, and same thing, as soon as I started learning more about them, I just took it off. I just private it, and I don't want people using, because people are commenting, oh, this is great, thank you for the information, and I got lots of views on it, but I took it off. I don't want people following this. Now my job now will be to create a guide that people can follow, that I stand behind now that I know more information. But it is important that we are constantly updating the information and doing the best, putting the animals first is really the simple way to put it.
Yeah, it always, for me, goes back to that trusting a source. You come across a person on YouTube who makes money by making videos, so what'll do them the best isn't giving you the best information, it's churning something out quickly and preferentially something that the viewer will like. So if you're somebody who wants to keep a reptile, then the nicest thing that you could hear is doesn't need any lights, doesn't need heating, in the case of a crested gecko, because that's cheap, that is simple, you don't have to worry about it, you don't have to think about it. Somebody watches your video saying that, they get that information, they think, great, this is wonderful, what great information I've just got. And then they're inclined to go and watch another one of those videos. And so it sort of sets up a cycle, if you will, of creating bad videos that do well but are wrong.
Yeah, it is totally that. It's a domino effect supporting the wrong thing. And there's nothing in YouTube to stop that from happening. The YouTube algorithm almost has a mind of its own. So it sways the search results and everything to things that people are clicking and liking. And it is, that's why I'm hoping eventually that model collapses, because eventually we need to start, people are going to realize, okay, I need better information here. I don't need the information about, the clickbaity topic. I need to understand why heat is important, why light is important. So I'm fingers crossed that will be the way of the future in hopefully the not so far future.
I suppose it's made difficult as well by the fact that the sources of information that are really good are typically those people that genuinely aren't interested in what they're doing from a business side of things. So, for example, Advancing Herpetological Husbandry on Facebook is an absolute brilliant group that I had never heard of until about 12 months ago. Mm-hmm. I suppose it didn't help that I didn't use Facebook back then, but it's there are brilliant resources out there by brilliant people, but you can't find them because those brilliant people are what they are. They're not businessmen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. So hopefully people like us can bring some of that brilliant information to the regular, the people who are looking for information, and slowly we can morph things. I am optimistic about the reptile industry in general. I think there are some great things going on, and your channel is one of them.
It's definitely going in the right way.
Yeah, I think your channel is a testament to that. You've had a lot of growth from when you started with the fish things, from when you were 9 to where you are now. And just when I look at your enclosures, I'm like, oh my God, I'm not doing a good enough job. Every time I watch your videos, it makes me feel bad about my own care. So I think that's a good reaction actually to have. Can you let everybody know where you can be found online?
Yeah, so the YouTube channel is JTB Reptiles, Instagram is at JTB_reptile, and I'm also on Facebook over at JTB Reptiles again. But, the Facebook's not the best one. Stick to the YouTube, then the Instagram, then look at the Facebook if you're bored.
Awesome, great. Well, I will have all of that in the show notes, of course. And Joseph, thank you very much. This was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Joseph, thank you very, very much for joining me. That was an excellent conversation. I know the listeners will find that quite fascinating, and I encourage you guys to go check out his videos. He has, like I said, some really great explanation videos, and he also covers a few controversial topics on his channel, so definitely go check him out. After we recorded the conversation, Joseph sent me 2 points that he wanted to correct, so you can actually tell the type of individual he is. He really is concerned about making sure the accurate information is getting to the listeners. So the 2 things he wanted to correct are: so in the chat, Joseph said there are 6 reptiles and amphibians that are native to the UK. And in actuality, there are 6 native species of reptiles alone, not including the amphibians. And the second thing he wanted to correct was, in the episode, he said it is previtamin D that interacts with UVB to become D3. And in actuality, it is provitamin D that interacts with the UVB. I hope you found that episode very informative. I know that I did, and I know we've talked about the electromagnetic spectrum a lot on the show now, and I think it is so important to continuously talk about it because it is so confusing. And as I'm recording this outro, I thought maybe I would just add a few more points that maybe will make things a little bit more clear for you if you're someone that's having trouble understanding the electromagnetic spectrum. So I'll just start by quickly reminding you of the analogy that Sam Parrott gave us in episode number 29, and that analogy was to compare light and heat to sound. When we think of sound, it is very clear to us that there are different wavelengths. Anything with a long wavelength is going to be more in your bass sounds, and anything in the shorter wavelengths is going to be more of a treble sound, so your higher pitch sounds. And of course, we have a mid-range of, wavelengths that are in between those two. On a simplistic way, that is sort of how you can think of the electromagnetic spectrum. It is full of energy, or it is energy that travels at different wavelengths. The longer wavelengths are going to be closer to your infrared, or are your infrared, and the shorter wavelengths are your UV rays. Now, the wavelengths themselves extend on either end. We get into, radio waves on the far end of the longer wavelengths, and then up to X-rays and gamma rays in the shorter wavelengths, with the higher or the shorter wavelengths having much higher energy than the longer wavelengths. Now, just like in sound, you can actually pull wavelengths outside of our hearing range. You could have something like a dog whistle, which is very, very high pitched to the point where our human ears can't pick up on it. That is the same as UV. UV has a short wavelength. It's shorter than we can see, meaning it is around us. We're just not able to visually see it with our eyes. And now on the other side, you can have frequencies of sound or wavelengths of sound that are so long they fall outside of our range as well. In other words, you can have a bass that is so low, it falls out of our range and you can no longer hear it. I think sound is easier to understand because we only interact with it with our ears, really. So as long as it's within our bandwidth or within the sort of the range that humans can hear, we understand it as sound. Although when you think about it, if you drop a wavelength of sound to the point where it is so long we can no longer hear it, you could probably still feel the vibration with your hand. So if you put your hand on whatever's emitting the sound, you'd probably still feel vibration, but you wouldn't be able to hear it. In the same way, you could feel infrared heat with your hand, but you wouldn't be able to see it. But I think because sound, we always only think of our ears and how we're, hearing, it makes it a lot more straightforward and less complicated. The electromagnetic spectrum, our bodies interact with in several different ways. Infrared wavelengths we're going to feel as heat. Visible light we're going to see with our eyes, and that sort of paints the picture of the world you look at. And ultraviolet rays are what give us sunburn. So you have these 3 very, very different ways of interacting with the electromagnetic spectrum. When we're talking about sound and the different wavelengths of sound, we really just think of, hearing. It is vibrations in the air, but we interpret it as hearing, and that's all. Now, with the electromagnetic spectrum, it comes with a bunch of other things. And the reason that is because it is so complicated. The energy that comes to us from the sun is incredibly complicated, and it is a questions that mankind, we still have not answered. How does a photon behave like a wave? What is going on here? We don't fully understand it. So don't look at the electromagnetic spectrum and then, toss your hands up and say, I don't understand this. Many people don't understand it, and including myself. I'm just trying to, relate this analogy to make it slightly more simple for us to understand. Because we interact with the electromagnetic spectrum in several different capacities, we tend to characterize them as totally different things. So we have heat in one basket, light in another basket, and UV in another basket. But that would be the same as saying bass is one thing and treble is another thing if you're looking at sound wavelengths. We would never do that because we interpret them as sound. So I don't know if this is helping or hurting your understanding of the electromagnetic spectrum, but again, it is all the same thing. It is the same exact type of thing, but the wavelengths are different. As the wavelengths get longer, we're getting more towards infrared, and as it gets shorter, we're getting closer to ultraviolet. And I really don't want to get into it too deeply because honestly, the further you think about it, the more you can confuse yourself. But really the main point is understanding that the beings that have evolved on the face of the earth were immersed in the sun during their entire evolutionary history. The sun is one of the building blocks of life, and I think we often get confused because you can keep many animals without access to the sun. We know that. You can keep them for a long time and they'll actually survive. But the question is what is the quality of life if they don't have access to something that's at least attempting to replicate the sun? Human beings can go an extraordinary long time without, maybe forever, without seeing the sun. But how healthy is that? You understand what it's like to be cooped up inside and maybe you have to go 2 or 3 weeks without seeing the sun. How horrible would that be? I live in a northern part of the world where we lose sunlight drastically in the winter, and it is very, very tough. When spring comes, there's like a weight lifted off your shoulders when you can finally see the daylight again and the sun and feel the warmth of the sun again. So it is not that animals will die if you don't provide them with the sun, which would almost be better because that would sort of force us to do this. But it is understanding that the welfare that the sun provides is crucial. I think at this point I am just rambling on for too long. So I'm going to wrap that up. I don't want to confuse myself even more than I probably already have. So thank you very much for listening to the podcast. If you want to give the podcast a rating on the Apple Podcasting app, I always do really, really appreciate that. And of course, if you want to leave a review, that is fantastic as well. Give me a follow on Instagram at AnimalsAtHomeCA so you don't miss any new content that I'm posting. As a reminder, Animals at Home is a proud supporter of the Amazon Rainforest Conservancy, and we are very close to getting up to the $400 mark in terms of the donations that we've made. So thank you very much to that. You guys are a part of that as well. And thank you to CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. If you are interested in those reptile starter kits that I was mentioning at the beginning of the episode, make sure you go check them out. The links are affiliate links, so if you do purchase something, a small commission does come back to me, which helps support the show. I will talk to you guys next time.